Serafina Cole hopped onto the wrong motorcycle at 11:54 p.m. on New Year's Eve, wearing a silk dress that cost more than her rent and a coat that was currently soaked through by the freezing Chicago rain. In exactly 60 seconds, a black sedan would skid around the corner and open fire. In exactly 10 minutes, she would be standing in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the skyline. Realizing the man she just clung to for dear life was far more dangerous than the one she was running from. But she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, she was just a woman trying to disappear into the shadows of a wet alleyway, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Gosh, I hate New Year's Eve, she thought, blinking away the stinging rain. To the rest of the world, tonight was about fresh starts and midnight kisses. To Serafina, it was a deadline. It was the night Silas Vale had promised he'd find her, no matter how deep she buried herself in the city. The gala she'd just escaped had been a gilded cage, full of people who looked at her and saw only Silas's beautiful, quiet companion. No one noticed the way her hands shook when he touched her arm. No one saw the bruises he hid under designer fabric. Tonight was supposed to be her vanishing act, but the rain was turning her escape into a nightmare. Some people were born to be the hunters, and Serafina was tired of being the prey. She'd slipped out the service entrance the moment the countdown began, the muffled sounds of the band fading behind her. The cold hit her like a physical blow, the damp air clinging to her skin. Chicago in late December was a beautiful, shimmering beast if you had a warm hand to hold, but Serafina was utterly alone. She checked her phone. For percent. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning aimlessly before the light died completely. The darkness of the alley felt like it was closing in. Then she saw it. A sleek, black motorcycle was idling at the mouth of the alley, its engine a low, predatory growl that vibrated in the pavement beneath her feet. The rider was a shadow among shadows, dressed in heavy black leather, his posture radiating a terrifying kind of stillness. She didn't stop to think. She didn't check for a rideshare sticker or ask for a name. Panic is a powerful motivator, and the sight of Silas's personal security detail emerging from the gala's front doors was all the incentive she needed. She lunged toward the bike, her heels clicking desperately on the cobblestones. She threw her leg over the back seat and slammed her body against the rider's broad, solid back. "Please," she sobbed, the sound lost in the wind. "Just go. Please move. My phone died. I'm the one who called. Just get me out of here, and I'll pay you double. Triple. Just drive." If you are a lover of stories that stays with you even after watching, make sure you watch it to the end and kindly subscribe to the channel so YouTube doesn't hide the next story from you. Let's dive in. The rider didn't move. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the mechanical hum of the bike and the heavy thud of Serafina's heart. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her fingers digging into the cold, wet leather of his jacket. He was broad-shouldered and leaned forward, his strength feeling like a literal wall between her and the men who wanted to drag her back to a cage. "Turn up the speed, please," she rambled, her face pressed between his shoulder blades. "They're coming. Please." A voice cut through the rain, cold and sharp as a jagged piece of ice. "Who the hell are you?" Serafina's breath hitched. This wasn't the voice of a panicked courier or a distracted driver. This was the voice of a man who owned the air he breathed. She tried to pull back, to see his face, but her hands were locked around him in a death grip. "I'm Serafina," she stammered. "I called for a ride. To the north side. Please, why aren't we moving?" The rider turned his head just enough for her to see the profile of a sharp, stubbled jaw and an eye that caught the streetlights like a piece of polished flint. There was no warmth there. There was only a calculating, dangerous curiosity. "You have 10 seconds to get off my bike," he said, his tone devoid of any emotion, before I make sure you never walk again. Serafina's blood turned to slush. She started to slide back, her pride forgotten, her only goal to run back into the dark. But then, a screech of tires echoed at the end of the alley. A black sedan swung into view, its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. "There she is," a voice shouted from the car. "Get her." The rider's eyes flicked to the side mirror. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The stillness was gone, replaced by a coiled, lethal tension. He didn't wait for her to get off. Instead, he reached back, his gloved hand catching her arm and hauling her back flush against him. "Grip me," he commanded, the low roar of the engine suddenly escalating into a scream. "What?" she gasped, her hands flying back to his waist. "Grip me or die," he snapped. "You're mine now." The bike lurched forward with such violent force that Serafina's head snapped back. She buried her face in his jacket, screaming as the motorcycle tore out of the alley and into the New Year's traffic. Behind them, the first pop of gunfire erupted, the sound of lead hitting metal echoing through the night. She had jumped onto the wrong bike, and as the rider leaned into a hairpin turn, Serafina realized she hadn't just escaped Silas. She had just been claimed by the Iron King. The roar of the engine drowned out the panicked scream that tore from Serafina's throat as the motorcycle surged through the rain. Every muscle in her body was locked tight, her fingers white-knuckled as they dug into Ryland's leather jacket. She didn't dare look back. Behind them, the screech of tires and the rhythmic, terrifying pop-pop-pop of gunfire sliced through the heavy New Year's Eve air. Ryland didn't flinch. He moved with a terrifying, fluid precision, leaning the heavy bike into a sharp curve that sent them weaving through a cluster of yellow taxis. Serafina's world was a blur of neon lights, splashing puddles, and the suffocating scent of ozone and expensive cologne. The wind whipped her hair into a tangled mess, but she only pressed her face harder into the space between his shoulder blades. She could feel the vibration of his chest as he shifted gears, a low hum of power that felt almost as dangerous as the men chasing them. "Keep your head down," he barked over the gale, his voice vibrating through her. "And don't you dare let go." She couldn't have let go if she wanted to. Fear had fused her to him. She watched through narrowed eyes as a black sedan, Silas's car, veered onto the sidewalk to bypass a delivery truck, its headlights bouncing wildly as it gained on them. Serafina saw the flash of a muzzle in the sedan's passenger window. "They're going to kill us," she shrieked, the rain stinging her eyes. "They're going to try," Ryland corrected, his tone chillingly calm. He suddenly slammed on the brakes, the bike fishtailing slightly on the slick asphalt. Serafina's heart leaped into her throat as they skidded into the entrance of a narrow, industrial alleyway she hadn't even noticed. Before she could breathe, Ryland kicked the bike into a higher gear. Instead of fleeing, he cut the lights. The world went pitch black for a split second before the ambient glow of the city's skyline filtered down through the rain. He pulled a heavy, matte black handgun from a holster she hadn't seen. He didn't even stop the bike. He just slowed it to a prowl, steering with one hand and aiming back toward the alley entrance with the other. The sedan roared past the alley, tires screaming as the driver realized they'd lost their target. They slammed on the brakes, reversing with a violent jerk. Crack! Crack! 2 shots rang out from Ryland's hand. He didn't fire at the men. He fired at the front tires of the sedan. The vehicle buckled, its rims grinding against the pavement with a shower of sparks that illuminated the dark alley for a fraction of a second. The car spun out of control, slamming into a parked dumpster with a bone-jarring crunch. Ryland didn't wait to see if they'd crawl out. He shoved the gun back into its holster, kicked the kickstand up, and revved the engine until the bike screamed. He tore through the exit of the alley, merging into a flow of traffic heading toward the luxury high-rises of the Gold Coast. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Serafina's ragged breathing. Her adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving her limbs heavy and trembling. She realized her silk dress was plastered to her skin, and the cold was finally starting to seep into her bones. "Who are you?" she whispered into the wind, her voice small and broken. "Where are you taking me?" The rider didn't answer for a long time. They swept past the shimmering lights of Michigan Avenue, the festive crowds cheering for the upcoming countdown, oblivious to the life-and-death struggle that had just unfolded blocks away. Finally, Ryland spoke, his voice dropping to a low, possessive rumble that sent a different kind of shiver down her spine. "You jumped on the back of the Iron King's bike, little bird," he said, his hand briefly covering hers where she gripped his waist, his thumb tracing her knuckles in a way that felt like a brand. "You wanted to go? Now, you're going exactly where I tell you." He steered the bike into the private underground parking garage of a shimmering glass tower. The heavy steel gate rolled shut behind them with a final, echoing thud, sealing them inside. The hunt was over, but as Serafina looked at the broad, menacing silhouette of the man she had mistakenly chosen as her savior, she realized the real story was only just beginning. The cage Silas had built for her was gone, but the one Ryland Cross was leading her into was made of gold, glass, and a danger she couldn't yet comprehend. The roar of the engine changed from a predatory growl to a rhythmic, mechanical scream as Ryland Cross kicked the bike into fifth gear. Serafina squeezed her eyes shut, her cheek pressed so hard against the rough grain of his leather jacket that she could feel the heat of his body through the rain-soaked fabric. The world behind them was a chaotic symphony of screeching rubber and the staccato rhythm of gunfire. But here, in the small pocket of space between her chest and his back, there was a terrifying, singular focus. Ryland didn't drive like a man fleeing for his life. He drove like a man reclaiming his territory. He banked the bike so low to the asphalt that Serafina's knee nearly grazed the shimmering, wet pavement. She let out a strangled cry, her fingers cramping as she clung to his waist, but Ryland didn't flinch. He threaded the needle between two delivery trucks with an inch of clearance, the wind whipping Serafina's hair into a frantic brown veil. The black sedan was relentless. It tore onto the sidewalk, scattering pedestrians who were just beginning to cheer for the final 10-minute countdown of the year. Through the roar of the wind, Serafina heard the sickening sound of metal grinding against metal. A bullet whined past them, shattering the glass of a storefront to their right. "Down!" Ryland's command wasn't a suggestion, it was an ironclad order. Serafina ducked her head, tucking herself into his shadow as he suddenly cut across 3 lanes of traffic, heading straight for the labyrinth of the elevated tracks. The flickering neon signs of the loop blurred into streaks of electric blue and poisonous green. Every time she thought they were about to crash, Ryland would shift his weight, the bike responding to him as if it were an extension of his own jagged soul. He took a sharp, impossible turn into a narrow service alley, the bike's tires losing traction for a heart-stopping second before the rubber bit back into the stone. Behind them, the sedan tried to follow, but the driver lacked Ryland's suicidal precision. The sound of a heavy impact echoed through the alley. The sedan had clipped a dumpster, its front end buckling with a groan of tortured steel. Ryland didn't slow down. He accelerated out of the other end of the alley, emerging onto a quiet, rain-slicked side street. The immediate threat was gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than the gunfire. Serafina finally dared to loosen her grip, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches. She looked up, her vision clearing as the rain began to taper off into a cold mist. They were stopped at a red light beneath a flickering street lamp. The light caught the side of the rider's helmet, a matte black obsidian that revealed nothing. Then, he reached up and flipped the visor. In the reflection of the bike's chrome mirror, Serafina saw his eyes properly for the first time. They weren't just cold. They were ancient, filled with a calm, lethal authority that made the hair on her arms stand up. She recognized that face. Every news outlet in Chicago had carried a blurred version of it over headlines about the city's surging underground power and the man the police couldn't touch. This wasn't a courier. This wasn't a bystander. This was Ryland Cross, the man they called the Iron King. "You?" she whispered, her voice trembling more now than it had when the bullets were flying. "I know who you are." He didn't turn around, but she saw his jaw tighten in the mirror. The light changed to green, but he didn't move. He sat there, the engine vibrating beneath them like a caged beast, letting the realization sink into her. "Then you know that Silas Vale is the least of your problems now, Serafina," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very seat of the bike. "By getting on this bike, you didn't just escape a jealous ex. You stepped into a war." He looked at her through the mirror, his gaze pinning her in place. "The men in that car saw your face. They saw you with me. In their world, that makes you mine. And in my world, I don't give back what's mine." Before she could protest, he revved the engine, the sound echoing off the empty buildings like a challenge to the city itself. The motorcycle shot forward, not toward her apartment, but toward the towering, glass and steel fortresses of the Gold Coast. Serafina realized with a sinking heart that the man who had saved her from the wolf was the lion who would never let her go. The motorcycle's engine finally died, replaced by a silence so profound it made Serafina's ears ring. They were in a subterranean garage that looked more like a gallery for high-end machinery than a parking lot. Ryland dismounted in one fluid motion, kicking the stand down and removing his helmet. Without the visor, his face was even more imposing, sharp, aristocratic features hardened by a life lived in the shadows. He didn't look back at her as he began walking toward a sleek, private elevator. "Follow me," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete. Serafina hesitated, her legs trembling as she climbed off the bike. Her damp silk dress clung to her skin like a second layer of ice. I should just go home. I can call a cab from the street." Ryland stopped, his hand hovering over the biometric scanner by the elevator. He turned slowly, his eyes raking over her shivering form with a look that was part pity and part cold calculation. "There is no home for you tonight, Serafina. Not unless you want to spend the first hour of the new year being fitted for a coffin by Silas's men." He didn't wait for her response. The elevator doors hissed open, and the sheer weight of his presence seemed to pull her forward. The ride up was silent and dizzying. When the doors opened again, Serafina gasped. The penthouse was a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and dark velvet. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago, the city lights shimmering through the rain like a carpet of fallen stars. It was magnificent, but as she stepped onto the plush rug, the click of the elevator doors sealing behind her sounded like a deadbolt. Ryland shed his leather jacket, revealing a tailored black shirt that hugged his broad frame. He walked over to a wet bar, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. "I can't stay here," Serafina said, her voice gaining a desperate edge as she looked for another exit. She spotted a heavy steel door near the kitchen. "I'm grateful you saved me, truly. But I have a life. I have a job. I can't just disappear into some high-rise because Silas threw a tantrum." She turned and marched toward the door. She reached for the handle, but it didn't budge. There was no latch, no keyhole. only a small digital screen that glowed red as she touched it. "The locks are slave to my biometrics," Ryland said, his voice coming from right behind her. She jumped, spinning around to find him standing inches away. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. The scent of sandalwood and rain was overwhelming. "Open it," she demanded, trying to summon a courage she didn't feel. "You can't keep me here. That's kidnapping." "It's salvage," Ryland countered, his tone eerily flat. He leaned one hand against the door above her head, effectively pinning her in place. "Look at me, Serafina. Really look." She forced herself to meet his gaze. Those flint-gray eyes were searching her face, stripped of any pretense. "Silas Vale is a man who thinks he can buy the world, but he's a child playing with fire," Ryland said. "The men who shot at us tonight weren't just his security. They were mercenaries hired from the Valente family. By jumping on my bike, you didn't just escape a bad boyfriend. You became a piece of leverage in a territory war. Every camera on that block captured your face pressed against my back. Every snitch in this city now believes you are the woman Ryland Cross would risk his life to protect." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "In their eyes, you aren't an innocent designer anymore. You are a target. If you walk out that door, you won't make it to the end of the block before they grab you to get to me. They'll use you to find my weaknesses, and when they're done, they'll discard you like trash." Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. The reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just fleeing a monster she knew. She had run straight into the arms of the man the monsters feared. "I don't even know you," she whispered, her bottom lip trembling. "You don't need to know me to be protected by me," Ryland replied. He reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear that had escaped her eye. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the ruthlessness in his words. "For now, this penthouse is the only square inch of Chicago where you're safe. You're a marked woman, Serafina, and like it or not, you belong to the Iron King until I say otherwise." He stepped back, gesturing toward a hallway lined with soft amber lights. "There are clothes in the third room on the left. Dry off, eat, try to sleep." He turned his back on her, returning to his drink as if the conversation were over. Serafina stood by the locked door, the cold weight of the "grip me" command still echoing in her mind. She looked out at the city, realizing that while the world was celebrating a new beginning, her old life had just ended. Serafina stood in the center of the vast living area, her breath hitching as the sheer scale of her predicament began to sink in. Outside the glass, the city erupted in a synchronized burst of light as the clock struck midnight. To millions of people, it was a moment of renewal, but to Serafina, the distant muffled sound of cheers felt like a eulogy for the life she had known. She was shivering violently now, the adrenaline that had kept her upright finally dissolving into a cold, marrow-deep exhaustion. Ryland watched her from the bar, his expression unreadable as he set down his glass. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a storm that had paused for breath. His eyes trailed from her pale, wet face down to her trembling hands. The delicate silk of her gala dress was ruined, a sodden rag that clung to her frame, making her look small and dangerously fragile in the middle of his brutalist sanctuary. Without a word, he walked toward her. Serafina instinctively shrank back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. "I'm not going to hurt you, Serafina," he said, his voice dropping to that low, tectonic rumble that seemed to settle in her very bones. He reached for the back of the sofa, picking up the heavy leather jacket he had discarded only minutes before. It was still damp from the rain, but as he stepped into her personal space, the sheer heat radiating from his body was like a physical weight. He held the jacket open. "Put this on," he commanded. It wasn't an option, it was a necessity. Serafina hesitated for a heartbeat before sliding her arms into the sleeves. The jacket was massive on her, the cuffs swallowing her hands, and the hem falling nearly to her knees. As the heavy leather settled over her shoulders, she was instantly enveloped in his scent. It was a complex, intoxicating mix. The spicy, woody notes of sandalwood, the sharp tang of the rain, and beneath it all, the metallic, acrid bite of gunpowder. It was the smell of a man who lived on the edge of violence. Yet the warmth of the lining was the first comfort she'd felt since the first shot had been fired in the alley. She pulled the lapels tight against her chest, burying her nose in the collar. The weight of the leather felt like a shield, a physical barrier between her and the world that had just tried to kill her. Better? Rylan asked. He was standing so close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the way his pupils were blown wide in the dim light of the penthouse. I think so, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the building's climate control. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. You said I was just leverage. Rylan's gaze darkened, his hand reaching out as if to touch her hair before he caught himself and gripped the edge of the leather collar instead. His knuckles grazed her neck, sending a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with the cold. You are leverage, he said, his voice tight. But you're my leverage. And I don't like it when my things are broken or neglected. He tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to look at him. In that alley, you asked me to go. You made a choice. It was the wrong choice for a quiet life, but it was the right choice to stay alive. Silas Vale will spend the next hour trying to explain to the Valente family how he lost you. He'll be desperate, and desperate men are loud. He let go of her chin, but he didn't move away. That jacket stayed on my back through 3 different hits tonight. It's seen more blood and lead than you could imagine. But right now, it's keeping you warm. Think of me the same way, Serafina. I am not a good man, but I am the only one standing between you and the men who think you're a prize to be won. Serafina clutched the oversized jacket tighter, the scent of sandalwood and gunpowder filling her senses until she felt lightheaded. She looked at the man the city called the Iron King and saw the predator he was, but she also felt the strange, terrifying safety of being in his shadow. Go to the guest room, Ryland said, his tone returning to a businesslike clip. There's a shower. Use it. I'll have food sent up, but don't expect a conversation. I have a city to quiet down before the sun comes up. As he turned back toward his monitors, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of a dozen security feeds, Serafina realized she was still holding her breath. She walked toward the hallway he had pointed out, her footsteps silent on the carpet, the heavy leather jacket swishing around her like a suit of armor. She was a captive, a marked woman, and a piece of a larger game. But as she closed the bedroom door, she realized she was no longer running. For the first time in years, she was exactly where Silas Vale couldn't reach her. The heavy leather jacket stayed on her shoulders even after she'd showered and changed into an oversized silk robe she found in the guest suite. The scent of sandalwood and gunpowder had become a grounding anchor, a reminder that the world outside this glass fortress was far more terrifying than the man who owned it. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the rhythmic pop of gunfire and saw the flash of the black sedan's headlights. Restless and fueled by a jittery, post-adrenaline hum, Serafina drifted back toward the main living area. The penthouse was shrouded in shadows, the only light coming from the glowing grid of a massive workstation tucked into a recessed nook near the balcony. Rylan wasn't there. His crystal glass sat empty on the desk, but the monitors were alive, pulsing with streams of data that looked like a digital waterfall. As a graphic designer, Serafina's world was built on visual patterns and hidden structures. She wasn't a hacker, but she understood the architecture of information. Her eyes scanned the screens, security feeds of the city, encrypted ledgers, and a central hub that seemed to be the nervous system of Ryland's operations. She noticed it almost immediately. A flicker, a stutter in the refresh rate of the lower left monitor. She moved closer, the heavy hem of the leather jacket trailing behind her. On the screen, a series of complex, aesthetic-heavy interfaces were being eaten away. It wasn't a crash. It was a deliberate, surgical strike. A ghost was moving through Ryland's machine, a sophisticated piece of malware that was systematically rebranding and rerouting the digital signatures of his offshore accounts. "What are you doing?" Ryland's voice was a low snarl from the darkness. He emerged from the kitchen area, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, jagged scars. His eyes were hard, suspicious. "I'm looking at your death warrant," Serafina said, her voice surprisingly steady. She gestured to the screen. "You're being bled dry, Ryland. Whoever is doing this isn't just stealing your money. They're erasing your identity. They're making it look like your transactions are originating from the Valente family's servers." Ryland was at the desk in 2 strides, his hands flying over the keyboard. His jaw tightened as he realized she was right. "The firewall hasn't even tripped. How did you see it? It's not a code-level breach yet. It's a visual exploit," she explained, stepping beside him. Her shoulder brushed his arm, and she felt the heat of his frustration. "Look at the kerning in the security certificates. See the way the logo pulses slightly out of sync? That's an overlay. They're masking the transfer beneath a layer of ghost images. It's a designer's trick, not a coder's." Ryland stared at the screen, his fingers hovering. For all his physical power and street-level dominance, he was a man who relied on systems he didn't fully build himself. He was the king of the iron, but he was vulnerable in the ether. "Can you stop it?" he asked. The question was a shift in power, a momentary admission of a gap in his armor. "I can do better than stop it," Serafina said, a spark of her old professional pride cutting through the fear. "I can track the origin of the overlay. If they used a specific design suite to build this mask, it leaves a digital thumbprint. A signature." She sat in his chair, the leather jacket bunching around her. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as a captor, but as a problem to be solved. She opened a subroutine, her fingers flying across the keys with a grace that matched his own on the bike. "This code, it's elegant," she muttered. "But the color hex codes they used for the mask, I've seen these before. This isn't just the Valentes." She pulled up a hidden file, a fragment of the malware's CSS. Her heart stopped. "Silas," she whispered. Ryland leaned over her, his hands gripping the back of the chair, effectively caging her. "Your ex? A tech mogul playing with mob money. He's more than a mogul. He's a perfectionist. He uses this specific palette for all his proprietary software. He's not just trying to kill you, Ryland. He's trying to frame you for a cross-family war so he can step into the vacuum." Ryland's eyes went dark, a cold, predatory light reflecting off the monitors. He looked down at Serafina, really seeing her for the first time, not as a burden or a piece of leverage, but as a weapon. "He wants to use my machine against me," Ryland rumbled, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder, his thumb pressing into the leather of his own jacket. "Show me how to burn him back, Serafina. Help me take his ghost and turn it into his ghostwriter." As the New Year's sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of bruised purple and gold, Serafina realized she was no longer just a passenger. She was the ghost in the machine, and she was about to show Ryland Cross that the quiet woman Silas Vale had tried to break was the one who held the keys to his destruction. The digital silence of the penthouse was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic pinging that didn't originate from Ryland's security feeds. Serafina's own phone, which had been charging on the marble counter, suddenly vibrated with a violent persistence. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the device. It was a video file, sent from an unknown, encrypted number. Ryland was instantly at her side, his presence a cold, solid weight. "Don't open it," he warned, his eyes narrowed at the screen. "It's from him," Serafina whispered, her heart hammered against her ribs. "I know how he sends files. He wants me to see." Against Ryland's silent command, she pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing Silas Vale sitting in his sterile, high-tech office. He looked impeccably groomed, but there was a frantic, jagged light in his eyes that Serafina knew too well. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking through it, straight at her. "Sarah," Silas's voice was smooth, yet it carried the edge of a serrated blade. "I know you're with him. I know you think the Iron King can protect you, but you've always had a habit of overestimating people. Here's the reality. Ryland Cross has exactly 12 hours before his entire infrastructure collapses. Every account, every shipment, every secret. I've already planted the evidence that he's the one who hit the Valente family's transport last night. By dawn, the city will be hunting him. But it doesn't have to be that way." Silas leaned forward, his face filling the screen. "Come back to the gala's north entrance by 3 a.m. alone. If you do, the digital ghost disappears. I'll pull the malware, and Ryland Cross can keep his little empire. If you don't, well, I've always wondered how long a king lasts when his crown is made of lead. Choose carefully, Sarah. His life is in your hands." The screen went black. The silence that followed was suffocating. "He's lying," Ryland growled, his hand tightening on the back of her chair. "He can't pull that off." "He can," Serafina countered, her voice trembling. "I saw the architecture, Ryland. He's already inside. He's not just stealing your money. He's setting you up for a war you can't win while your hands are tied. He's doing this because of me. This is all because I jumped on that bike." She stood up, the oversized leather jacket sliding off her shoulders and pooling on the floor. She felt exposed, small, and devastatingly responsible. While Ryland turned back to the monitors, his jaw set in a grim line of defiance, Serafina saw her opening. She couldn't let him burn for her. She had spent years being the victim. She wouldn't be the cause of someone else's destruction. She waited until Ryland was distracted by an incoming call from his lieutenants. His back turned as he stepped into his glass-walled office. She moved with the silence of a shadow, snatching her coat and slipping toward the balcony. She knew the elevator was locked to his biometrics, but the service stairs on the terrace were a manual override in case of fire, a detail she'd noted in the digital blueprints. The cold air hit her like a physical strike as she stepped onto the terrace. The rain had turned into a fine, freezing mist that blurred the edges of the city. She was halfway to the service door when a voice, darker and more dangerous than the wind, stopped her in her tracks. "Where do you think you're going, Serafina?" She spun around. Ryland was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the amber light of the penthouse. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "I have to go," she cried, her voice cracking. "He'll destroy everything you've built. You heard him. I'm the price for your safety. I can't live with your blood on my hands. Ryland, I'm just one person. Your empire is thousands. You think I give a damn about the money?" Ryland stepped out onto the balcony, ignoring the freezing mist. He moved toward her with a slow, predatory grace until she was backed against the glass railing, the city lights shimmering hundreds of feet below. "You think I'd trade you for a few servers and a clean ledger? It's not just money. It's your life." Ryland reached out, his hands catching her waist and pulling her flush against him. The heat of his body was a fierce contrast to the winter air. He forced her to look up at him, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "Listen to me," he rumbled, his breath ghosting over her lips. "Silas Vale thinks he can buy and sell people. He thinks he can blackmail a man like me. But he made one fatal mistake. He let me see what you're worth. You aren't a trade, Serafina. You aren't a price to be paid. You're mine. And I would rather watch this entire city burn to the ground than let you walk back to a man who treats you like a commodity." "But the war. Let them come," Ryland snapped, his grip tightening. "Let the Valentes come. Let the police come. Let Silas send every mercenary he has. They'll find out that the Iron King doesn't break. And they'll find out that when someone touches what belongs to me, I don't negotiate. I escalate." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. For a heartbeat, the high-speed chase, the digital ghost, and the impending war vanished. There was only the sound of their breathing and the terrifying, beautiful realization that she wasn't being protected because she was a passenger. She was being protected because she was the prize. "Now," he whispered, "get back inside. We have a ghost to hunt." The chill of the balcony clung to Serafina even as she stepped back into the climate-controlled warmth of the penthouse. Ryland didn't let go of her immediately. His hands stayed heavy on her waist, his thumbs tracing the line of her ribs through the thin silk of her robe. For a man who lived by the blade and the bullet, his grip was surprisingly steady. But as she looked up into his eyes, she saw a flicker of something he had spent a lifetime hiding. It wasn't fear, it was the jagged, raw edge of an impossible choice. Ryland let out a long, slow breath and turned toward his workstation, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he pulled a small, encrypted burner phone from his pocket. He stared at it for a moment, the blue light of the screens reflecting in his iris like cold fire. "Ryland," she whispered, moving to stand beside him. "What are you doing?" "Silas thinks he's the only one with a kill switch," Ryland said, his voice flat. "He's right about one thing. In 10 minutes, the Valente family will receive a digital proof that I was the one who liquidated their North Side holdings. It's a ghost trace Silas planted. Once that goes live, my business is over. My ships will be seized, my men will be hunted, and the Iron King will be a memory by sunrise." He looked at her then, his gaze heavy with a sudden, startling vulnerability. "I could stop it. I have a countercode that would wipe my servers clean, erasing the evidence Silas planted. But it's a scorched earth protocol. It would kill the tracking signal we're using to find where Silas is broadcasting from. If I save the business, I lose the only lead I have to the man who is trying to take you back." Serafina's breath hitched. She realized the weight of what he was saying. He was standing at the edge of his empire, holding the keys to everything he had bled for, and he was considering throwing it all away just to keep a bead on her ex. "You can't do that," she said, her voice trembling. "Your empire, it's your life. You've worked for years to build this. I'm just a woman you met in an alleyway 3 hours ago." Ryland laughed, a short, humorless sound that didn't reach his eyes. He stepped closer, crowding her back against the mahogany desk. "I've spent 10 years building a fortress so I could be the one who decides who lives and who dies in this city. I thought the power was the prize. I thought the Iron King was who I was." He reached out, his hand cupping the side of her face. His palm was warm, his skin slightly rough against her cheek. "But tonight I saw you. I saw the way you looked at those bullets like they were just another obstacle. I saw the way you looked at me even after you knew what I was. Silas wants to trade your soul for my money. He wants to make me choose." Ryland's thumb traced her bottom lip, his eyes darkening. "He's about to learn that I don't lose what's mine. And I've decided, Serafina, that I'd rather be a king with nothing but a bike and a gun than a billionaire who let a man like Silas Vale walk away with the only thing that's made me feel human in a decade." Without looking away from her, Rylan reached back and tapped a single command on his keyboard. A sharp, digital chime echoed through the room. The main monitor turned red, a skull and crossbones graphic flashing briefly before the entire screen went black. A second later, the other monitors followed suit. The humming of the servers beneath the floorboards died. The lights in the penthouse flickered, then dimmed to a low-voltage emergency amber. He had done it. He had let his empire burn. "The tracking signal is locked," Ryland said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He grabbed his leather jacket from the floor and held it out to her. "The business is gone, but I know exactly where Silas is hiding. And since he was so kind as to invite you, I think it's only fair that we show up together." The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened lethal intent. Serafina took the jacket, the smell of sandalwood and gunpowder wrapping around her like a promise. She realized then that Ryland Cross hadn't just chosen her safety over his business. He had burned his old life to the ground so he could build a new one with her at the center. "Grip me," he said, heading for the elevator, his hand reaching back for hers. "We're going to end this." The garage was cold, but Serafina didn't feel it. She sat on the passenger pillion of the idling bike, her laptop balanced on her knees, tethered to the motorcycle's internal diagnostic port. Ryland stood over her, his silhouette blocking the harsh, overhead fluorescent lights. He was checking his sidearm, the metallic slide of the weapon clicking into place with a finality that made her chest tighten. "We have 3 minutes before the Valente family realizes the servers are down," Ryland said, his voice low. "Can you do it?" Serafina didn't answer with words. Her fingers were a blur across the keys, her mind working through the logic gates Silas had built. She wasn't just a designer anymore. She was an architect of a counterstrike. She had taken Ryland's scorched earth protocol and twisted it. Instead of just letting the data burn, she had channeled the heat. "I'm not just stopping him, Ryland," she whispered, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her determined eyes. "I'm hijacking his broadcast. He thinks he's the only one who can frame people. I'm rerouting his proof back to the Valentes, but I'm changing the sender's signature from you to their own internal accountant. By the time they check the logs, they won't be looking for the Iron King. They'll be looking for the mole in their own house." She felt Ryland's hand heavy on her shoulder, a silent, grounding approval. "He's live," she announced, her pulse leaping. "Silas is waiting for me at the gala entrance, broadcasting a dead man's switch signal to ensure his safety. He thinks he's holding the leash." She hit a final sequence of keys. A progress bar flashed red, then turned a deep, predatory green. "I'm in his comms. I've opened a back door into his personal cloud. Every message he ever sent me, every threat he ever deleted. I'm uploading it all to the public server of his own company's website. And while I'm at it, I'm locking his car doors. He's sitting in that armored sedan of his, thinking he's a god. I just turned it into a glass coffin." For the first time since she had hopped on the back of his bike, Serafina felt a surge of cold, sharp power. The woman who had spent years shrinking to fit into the corners of Silas's life was gone. The Bambi he had tried to break had found her teeth, and they were made of silicon and spite. Ryland leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You've crippled him," he rumbled, a dark smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He's a ghost now, and he doesn't even know it." "Not yet," she said, closing the laptop with a crisp snap. "I want to see his face when he realizes he's lost everything to the woman he thought was a trophy." Ryland swung his leg over the bike and pulled his helmet on, the visor clicking shut. He reached back, his hand finding hers and pulling it firmly around his waist. "The Valentes are distracted, and Silas is trapped," Ryland said, the engine beginning to growl. "Let's go collect your pound of flesh." The motorcycle tore out of the garage, the tires screaming against the concrete. They hit the street, and Serafina leaned into Ryland's back, her grip no longer born of desperation, but of a shared, lethal purpose. The city was a blur of New Year's neon, but the only thing that mattered was the signal on the map, the glowing dot where Silas Vale sat, waiting for a woman who no longer existed, unaware that the Iron King and his queen were coming to collect. The bike glided through the streets of Chicago like a silent wraith, the roar of the engine now a triumphant purr against the backdrop of a city waking up to a new reality. They had left the gala behind, leaving Silas Vale trapped in his own high-tech cage, screaming into a phone that no longer connected, while the Valente family turned their sights on the man who had actually betrayed them. Serafina leaned into Ryland's back, her hands tucked into the pockets of his heavy leather jacket. The weight of the world hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. It no longer felt like a crushing burden. It felt like a foundation. As they crossed the bridge toward the lakefront, the sky began to bleed into shades of pale gold and soft apricot, the first light of the new year reflecting off the surface of Lake Michigan. Ryland slowed the bike as they reached a private overlook, the city skyline towering behind them like a crown of glass and steel. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind she'd known with Silas. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. He dismounted and reached for her, his hands catching her waist to steady her as she climbed off the pillion. His eyes, usually so guarded and cold, were softer now, reflecting the rising sun. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, a matte black drive on a silver chain. The business is gone, but the infrastructure is still there, Ryland said, his voice a low rumble. I told you I burned it all, but I didn't tell you why. I burned the old version because it wasn't built for us. It was built for a man who didn't have anything to lose. He stepped closer, the heat of his body a familiar comfort against the morning chill. He draped the silver chain around her neck, the drive resting against her heart. Everything is on there, he said. The keys to the encrypted servers, the deeds to the safe houses, the digital bypasses for the city's core. I'm not just giving you a place to stay, Serafina. I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom. From this moment on, nothing moves in this city without your eyes on it. You aren't a passenger anymore. You're the one who keeps us invisible. Serafina looked down at the drive, then up at the man who had risked everything for a woman he didn't even know 3 hours ago. She realized then that Ryland hadn't just saved her from Silas. He had given her the power to save herself. Why me? She whispered, her fingers closing around the metal. Ryland reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his touch firm and possessive. Because some people are meant to be forgotten, and some are meant to be found. I spent my whole life looking for a reason to stay in this city. I found it in the middle of a rainstorm on the back of my bike. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. The Iron King needs his queen, Serafina. And Chicago is going to learn that we don't just survive. We rule. As the sun fully crested the horizon, bathing the city in a brilliant, blinding light, Serafina didn't look back at the life she'd left behind. She climbed back onto the bike, her arms wrapping around Ryland's waist with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't fleeing anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Ryland revved the engine, the sound a defiant roar that echoed across the water. They shot forward, heading back into the heart of the city, two shadows merging into one as they rode toward the dawn of their new world. The year had just begun, and for the first time in her life, Serafina Cole wasn't afraid of the dark. Thanks for watching till this moment. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Kindly tell me in the comment section the country you are watching from. I'd love to know how far it has traveled.